Perfect. Yeah. So let's get to the origins of Google. So, there's a funny story about the internet, because when you're referring to big tech, we're talking about the big tech internet companies, primarily here, so like Google. And, they're all based on the internet. And the internet was created by the American military in order to manage the American empire. It was created by DARPA in the 1960s in order to digitize and be able to quickly share within the military all of the social science research that was being funded by the Eisenhower administration and the Kennedy administration, to be able to do anthropological and social science research, the reams of academic work that the military was paying academics to produce on foreign populations who were posing insurgency concerns to US installed dictators in different regions, or to US managed governments, after we had begun to territorially acquire all these different countries during the Cold War. And there were student revolts on college campuses in the 1960s against the internet before the internet even went private, because the internet, the World Wide Web, the private internet that all of us use, was not debuted until 1991, December 1990. But even in the 1960s, people realized that the computer was an instrument of U.S. statecraft. In fact, during these sort of anti-Vietnam protests at MIT, there you can even look for this if you run a search for this on your favorite search engine. They were revolting against what they called the octoputer, the idea that the computer and this DARPA funded internet was going to be used as a world-spanning octopus power for the military to control other countries that student groups were accusing of being subject to U.S. imperialism. Now, what happened was in 1991, the World Wide Web rolls out, and DARPA turns over the internet to the National Science Foundation and projects that through a bunch of universities to make it publicly available for commercial use. But the other side of this is that it was being used for soft power projection. See, when I was describing Wisner's Wurlitzer, the CIA created a bunch of proprietary media organizations like Voice of America, Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, Radio Free Asia. These were all radio and then television programming that would project US media, and also pay media organizations within foreign countries to produce pro-US propaganda. And that was a very easy thing to do when there were only a couple of different radio frequencies available in that country, or that country wasn't producing its own native content, its own native TV content. As other countries caught up to us in the other modalities of media soft power competition, the promise of the new internet for the State Department, the military, and the CIA was that this would be sort of like a new radio, a new TV, a new Voice of America, a new channel where America had first mover advantage, because it was all the American internet. And so right away, as soon as the internet came out, DARPA commissioned a program called the Massive Digital Data Systems Program. And the Massive Digital Data Systems Program was a joint project of the NSA and the CIA in order to track how, quote, birds of a feather flock together online. And their goal was to create what they referred to as a early warning political radar system, to be able to track how political groups around the world were rising and falling, and how they were congregating together on the internet. Because in Web 1.0, you had web forums and you had these static web pages. And so you could track what groups in country X were accessing or maintaining these websites, and you could use that to draw a network map of an entire political movement that you either wanted to run CIA support to, or you wanted the CIA to crush through counterinsurgency. And part of this involved tracking search results through the early search engines that were created to be able to navigate this new internet. And this is where Google comes into the picture. In 1995, Larry Page and Sergey Brin are PhD students at Stanford, and their PhD is being sponsored essentially by DARPA. They had a DARPA grant to do this search engine aggregation work. And that DARPA grant meant that they were reporting to their grant administrator, which was ultimately the CIA and the NSA. They would then take this work that they got the CIA NSA grant to do to form a company called Google in 1998. So right from the outset, Google was a military and CIA and statecraft, let's say dual use technology, shall we say. Even all of Google's first mover advantages were based on this. Google quickly came out with very innovative product sets like Google Maps, a sort of first of its kind ability to be able to just plug in an address and know how to get there or go anywhere on Earth and zoom in on it. Well, Google didn't just, brainiacs sitting in a garage, come up with the code for that. They got Google Maps by purchasing the CIA's keyhole satellite software. So it was the CIA's spy satellite software that is the only reason Google got Google Maps. Google's global operations work is based on this as well. So one of the reasons that censorship set in across Google search results and across YouTube is because of a fundamental restructuring of how Google operated beginning after the 2016 US presidential election. Started a little bit before that with the story of a guy named Jared Cohen. So let's just take a step back and look at the history of social media. You had Facebook in 2004, YouTube in 2005, Twitter in 2006, smartphone in 2007. In 2007, a young kid named Jared Cohen arrives at the inner sanctum of the State Department. It's a place called the Policy Planning Staff. The iceberg of American diplomacy has overt policies and strategies from the State Department and covert from the CIA. And so they together form a united front of US diplomacy, which means the dirty tricks from the covert side have to be constantly synchronized with the overt actions of the State Department. So that if you're trying to regime change, the country's government, the State Department has to know that and know exactly what's going on when they send a delegation to that foreign country's government for their demands or what they want. That synchronization process happens at the policy planning staff. That's that inner cell within the State Department that coordinates the CIA and the State Department. And this is a place that's normally occupied by the sort of wise old men, 50, 60, 70-year-old, fuddy-duddies. Jared Cohen got there at about the age 25, 26. Young kid, but he was brought on by the Bush administration because he had created something called movements.org, and he was embedded basically from his late teen years into the highly volatile youth movements that were being essentially sponsored by the CIA in Middle East, North Africa, in these conflict zones. And because it's so important to instrumentalize student groups and youth groups for color revolutions in US statecraft, he was brought in as essentially a young guy who's hip to what the kids are doing these days, so that could be folded into American statecraft for how best to exploit those young people. And what Jared Cohen did is he gets in around 2006, 2007, and he looks around at these older guys and he says, what are we doing formulating CIA activities out of US embassies or US consulates or CIA station houses? All the groups we want to mobilize are on Facebook, they're on Twitter, they're on YouTube. We need a doctrine of digital statecraft 2.0, to be able to run intelligence operations using social media. And this became the absolute talk of the town of Washington, and he became an overnight celebrity with this concept. He was considered so valuable to not just the Bush administration and Condoleezza Rice, the Secretary of State there, as a Republican appointee, but his work was considered so vital, the CIA's use of social media, that he was kept over by the Democrats when Barack Obama won the 2008 election and Hillary Clinton became Secretary of State. This is extremely unusual in Washington, let me tell you, when a political appointee is kept over from the next administration. And so he then was effectively credited with starting the Arab Spring, which was a State Department and CIA sponsored series of Facebook and Twitter revolutions stretching from Tunisia to Egypt, which were said to be the sort of high point of digital democracy, when hashtags and Facebook groups were used to coordinate tens of millions of people to take to the streets to overthrow governments that were deemed to be hostile to US interests. At that point, Jared Cohen could have done anything. He was voted by Time magazine as one of the top 50 most powerful people in Washington at the age of 30. But he left in the heat of all of that. People were saying this kid's going to be president one day. He could have done anything, but he goes over and basically stuns the Beltway crowd by moving in 2010 to a tiny little one person nonprofit within a mid sized tech company called Google. At the time in 2010, Google was only ranked number 120 by market cap in terms of US companies. They were not even a top 100 sized company in 2010. And he was poached by Google, as the story goes, in order to sit in a room all day, stare at a white wall, and think by himself about all the creative ways that Google could use its proprietary data and resources to solve complex geopolitical problems. Julian Assange would later term this transition the moment that Google became the shadow State Department. And this came out in Stratfor documents and WikiLeaks when, basically CIA contractors were openly speculating that Jared Cohen's move from policy planning staff at State to Google was a way to synchronize what the CIA was doing with Google resources. Now, this becomes very important to the internet censorship story because this one person think tank, Google Ideas, would later be rebranded Google Jigsaw. And Google Jigsaw was initially doing sort of a lot of free speech tech work so that dissident groups being backed by the CIA and State Department would be able to freely proliferate their media influence in regions where there's state control over media, like Iran or like Egypt. But in 2016, Google Jigsaw took on a new power for censorship of political movements that were giving rise to leaders like Donald Trump in the US, also on the left wing populist side, like Jeremy Corbyn in the UK, who are NATO skeptical, all the different populist parties in Europe, in India, in Pakistan, in Japan. And so Google Jigsaw became this kind of CIA intermediated censorship octopus, and it created what was essentially the world's first retail, what I call weapons of mass deletion, AI censorship superpowers to be able to scan and ban tens of millions of posts when it created, in the immediate aftermath of the 2016 election, something called Perspective, which rates every post essentially on the internet by a toxicity score that can be used to automatically throttle it from public view.
Jesus Christ, Jared.